Thank you for joining me on the Southern Report once again. If you like what we do here, please like, subscribe, hit the bell, and all of that jazz. To say that events in the Middle East are moving so fast, I think, is a bit of an English understatement in the best sort of English cultural way of explaining these things. And there is no better person to bring on and have a wonderful discussion wherever it takes us, wherever God wants to take us. And that's my friend, John Haller. So I will bring John on now. John, good to see you again, my friend. I know we had a discussion a couple of days ago, but we need to continue to have this discussion.
Yeah, things are unfolding rather quickly, and I will say, as someone who's followed world events and sort of made it my focus in ministry and Bible prophecy and everything, the situation in Syria and what's going on, I think has probably generated more YouTube and Rumble media content. It's been, as I mentioned to you earlier, if you converted all of those videos to water, it would repeat Noah's flood. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's just, and everybody's got an opinion, and now you layer on top of that the unknown drones situation here in the U.S. And I think you've had some of it over there in the UK as well. My media feed is completely full. And so my friends who are well-meaning, they send me these hour and 50-minute long videos, and it's sort of like, what do you think of this? And it's like, and I get 100 of these a day. So it's a little bit difficult to keep up. And so here I am contributing to the flood. So,
well, it's one of the reasons why, when I was contacting you a few days ago and said, let's do an interview with the events on Syria, which is, it's not about us being clever. It's trying to get ahead of certain things. And also, I think to try and really just to give a balanced view of how we see things unfolding, which is changing minute by minute by minute. So, John, you shared with me a tweet, which I'm sorry I can't get the map up, but from a gentleman from the Druze giving a very, very interesting statement. Do you want to unpack that for us?
Yeah, so maybe we should talk a little bit about who the Druze are. The Druze are kind of, I've met them, I've seen them, I've eaten in a Druze restaurant a couple times when I'm in Israel. They're mainly in Israel. They're located in the far north along the Israel-Syrian border. In the 67 war, as you know, Israel took over the Golan Heights. Prior to that time, Syria controlled the Golan Heights. And if you've ever been there, it's almost like a sloping wall. You go from the Sea of Galilee, which is about 600 feet below sea level, up to the top of the Golan Heights, which is, probably 4,000 feet above that. And what they did was, along the Sea of Galilee, Israel had a lot of kibbutzim and farms. And what the Syrians used to do is they used to launch artillery shells down on the farmers. There were terror attacks. So in the 67 war, Israel took over the Golan Heights, and it's an amazing battle. And when you read the description of the battle about how they took these tanks up these steep slopes, it has a very much of a divine element to it. It's almost inexplicable. But I remember I went to Israel the first time about 30 years ago. 1995, and we went to the Golan Heights. And I've been studying Middle East and Bible prophecy and stuff all my life. But the thing that struck me as we were traveling around up there was, this is the most strategic piece of military land in the entire world. And there's no way Israel will ever give this back. And so in the 73 Yom Kippur War, There was a very famous tank battle there. Again, Mike Pompeo, when he was the U.S. Secretary of State, mentioned this in a meeting about how he studied that when he was a student at West Point, at the U.S. Military Academy there, because it was such a significant tank battle. And I think Pompeo's thing in the military was tanks anyway. So it's a very, very famous battle. And then, of course, during the first Trump administration, Trump issued a declaration that the Golan Heights belong to Israel, and they even have a little village or development up in the Golan now called Trump Heights. But it's an incredible, you have to see it to believe it. So when you're on the Israeli side of the Golan Heights, or the Syrian side, the side close to Syria, the Syrian border, you can virtually see with a little bit of binoculars and assistance and a clear day, you can see all the way to the outskirts of Damascus. That's how close it is. It's 25, 30 miles, and you're up high, and it's mostly a plain all the way to Damascus. So it's very, I don't think people understand how things are close. For example, Damascus itself is only about, it might take you a couple hours to drive it, assuming there were no wars or anything going on, to drive from Damascus to Beirut. It's only 50 miles as the crow flies. So I don't think we understand, we sometimes forget how small Israel is relative to everything else. And I think Israel is maybe less than 1/3 the size of Syria. I mean, Israel's a very small country. So anyway, so along that border, what happened was there were Druze villages on what became the Syrian side after they reached an agreement in 1974 about where the border was going to be in a no man's or land or buffer zone. And that division, that border split some Druze villages up there. Now the Druze are kind of they're religious, ethnic, and so they occupy areas of southern Syria, northern Israel. The town of Majal Shams in Israel is the furthest north town in Israel. It's at the base of Mount Hermon, and it's probably I would say it's 95% Druze. That's just a guess. That's where Hezbollah rocket landed in the midst of a soccer field and killed about 12 children.
Yeah.
Earlier this year. And the Druze have always been very, the Druze on the Israeli side, they serve in the IDF. They're very loyal to Israel. And I'm going to tell you a quick story to kind of put in context the Druze thing that happened. So what the Druze guys did on the Syrian side. So when the war started, there were some attacks on the UN forces that were in the buffer zone between Israel and Syria in the Golan Heights. Israel just said, okay, we're not going to tolerate this. We're just going to take over the whole buffer zone. And then they also took over the Syrian part of Mount Hermon, which is a very strategic. I mean, Mount Hermon is almost 10,000 feet above sea level at its peak, just a little under 10,000 feet. And so it sits high up. If you look at a geographic map of Israel, you can clearly see Mount Hermon sitting there as a very tall mountain in North Israel. So let me go back, though, to the 67 war to kind of give you an idea of what might be going with these Druze guys. And I should say the Druze guys in the Druze villages on the Syrian side of the border said, hey, we don't want any part of this new Islamic state that's emerging in Damascus and Aleppo. We want to become part of Israel. And you see all the anti-Israel people saying, oh, Israel's invading Syria and they're on the outskirts of Damascus. And that's really a lot of anti-Israel, anti-Jewish propaganda that's being circulated. Netanyahu came out and said, we're gonna keep the buffer zone, and we want to work with these people that are in the state, but we want their assurances that they're not coming after us. There are plenty of videos out there now of these guys taking over Syria that say, hey, we're on our way to Jerusalem. I mean, this is a typical jihadi thing, and we probably need to talk more about that. So the Druze reaction, though, was, hey, and it's been a problem because families were divided when at the end of the 67 and 73 war and this treaty and the villages, and it's always been kind of a political hot potato. But the Druze serve in the military, and in fact, they provide some of the security at border police in Jerusalem. Now, you say, why does Jerusalem need border police? Because I thought it was in Israel. But if you've ever been there, one day my friend Brian Schrager and I said, let's walk around the outside of the city. So we went down to the Western Wall. We went out through the Dung Gate, and then we walked along the eastern wall of the Temple Mount. And as I was looking at my phone, though, it had Google Maps on it, and it kept saying, you're entering a foreign country. Do you really want to enter a foreign country? I mean, I was constantly getting these warnings, and I'm like, this is Jerusalem. This is the capital of Israel. I'm like, what's going on, you know? And this was, by the way, this was a few months before Trump made that announcement in 2017 that Jerusalem, the U.S. Embassy, was finally going to be moved to the capital of Israel, Jerusalem. So, and it's, by the way, for me, I'm not a walker. I've had bad knees and stuff. The walk around that side of the old city is a very difficult walk. It's very steep up and down. It's a sidewalk, but it's tough. So the border police, though, at the Lion's Gate, where the Israeli forces entered to take back the Temple Mount, it's in the Arab quarter of the old city. A lot of times those guards are Druze because it's Arabs, and you don't want the interaction between Arabs and Jews. It's kind of a volatile thing anyway. And there was some attacks a couple of years ago on guards at that particular entrance, and a couple Druze IDF or border police were killed. And so it's always been, everybody depending which side you choose to follow, the Israelis say, hey, we want the Druze, and the Syrians say, no, the Druze don't want to be part of you. They want to be part of us. And now, when push comes to shove, the Druze want to be part of Israel. And when we were at Tel Dan, probably 10, 11 years ago, they told us a story. And when you go to Tel Dan, this is the ancient city of Dan. It's where Jeroboam put up the golden calf, one of his golden calves. He put one at Bethel, and he put one at Dan. Because he was, I would say, in the teaching that I've done on Ezekiel 23, I bring that story in because he was the first seeker-sensitive pastor, because he said, hey, if we make these people go all the way to Jerusalem, they'll follow the temple in Jerusalem, and I'll lose their devotion to me. So he set up golden calves, and one was at Dan. So in the 67 war, that Dan was right on the Syrian border. Okay, the Golan Heights didn't belong to Israel at that time. The border fence was right alongside the Tel. So Israel knew this is going to be a battle point. So they brought archaeologists in and said, where can we dig our trenches? And so you go there today and you will see trenches and corrugated metal panels and like a little steel superstructure of trenches dug along the north end of the Tel at Dan, right next to the where the altar of the golden calf was. And the altar and the golden calf and the worship place. If you look up into, so if you're standing there looking north, now that's all Israel. control
Right.
after the 67 war. And it's called
Right.
Shiva Farms. And the knuckleheads that run our foreign policy, like Amos Hochstein, who my understanding is an Israeli citizen and served in the IDF actually in his youth, he has wanted to negotiate away Sheva Farms. They call it Sheva Farms like it's just a farm. It's the whole Golan Heights that he's trying to negotiate away. Unfortunately, he's only going to be able to do his damage for another 40 days. And I don't know what they have planned. I'm very concerned about it, particularly in light of the war that's going on. But if you stand there and look to the north at Dan and you look up to the left, probably a little less than 2 miles away is a village called Gajar. Gajar sits actually in the 67 war. It was in Lebanon. Israel fights the war, and about 2 weeks after the 6-day war was over, these people came walking down the hill from the city of Gajar. It was the village elders, and they were waving a white flag. And the soldiers were like, what's going on here? And they said, hey, we're starving. We're not getting any supplies from Lebanon or Syria. We want to be part of Israel. And it's a beautiful little village. So Israel took it over. And then probably sometime in the mid 2010, 2015 range, some wise person who's actually an idiot decided we needed to divide the village between Lebanon and Israel. So they divided it between Lebanon and Israel. And the people were like, we want to be part of Israel. We actually like living part of Israel. So the village has been divided. In last year, in 2023, I believe it finally opened for tourism, so that Jewish Israelis could go there and spend the weekend in a bed and breakfast. It's a beautiful mountain village, and they got this beautiful little square and everything. So just like in 67, those people wanted to become part of Israel. Now these Druze in Syria want to become part of Israel as well. And
let's just quickly make a point about the importance of the Golan Heights and the fact that there's been this push, hasn't it, as you said, but to go back to they would like to go back to the Palestinians, then so-called all of that side would like to go back to 1967 borders, etc., which would, of course, totally and utterly weaken Israel.
There was no Palestinian state in 1967.
Absolutely.
The area called the West Bank was occupied by Jordan, and I have a bunch of stories I could tell about that.
No, yeah, absolutely. It's this whole thing of the narrative. Of course, we have to remind ourselves how Yasser Arafat then inventing that, going to some PR company in New York sometimes, and at some point, and just saying, how can I create this victimhood narrative? And then of course the rest is history. And then we'd say that as a contact of mine used to have a Palestinian passport in regard to when the British were out there from the Balfour, from Balfour to 1947, when they then beat the retreat, and of course various missiles would then be firing against the Jewish people at that time by Arabs that had Made in Britain on it. So I'll just throw that out there. But John,
I can show you headlines from the New York Times during World War II, and one of the headlines says, Arabs launch boycott of Palestinian goods. Because they didn't consider it a Palestinian Arab state or anything like that. They didn't want to buy the goods because they were made by Jews who they referred to as Palestinians. This is a total Russian propaganda operation.
Absolutely.
And at some point, maybe now is to do this, because there is been launched, in my view, this anti-Jewish, anti-Israel narrative on many levels. And sometimes it's more subtle than not. So I'm going to use an example, and I probably would agree with this guy on 98% of his views. But he is anti-Israel to a fault. His name is Thomas Massey.
Massey, yep.
He is a congressman. And so he was on Redacted. That's Clayton and Natalie Morris. Clayton used to be with Fox News. And I'm telling you, they get on there on these anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian sprees, and it's disgusting. And by the way, people send me their videos all the time, because some of the stuff I would agree with. And I said, they're anti-Israel, anti-Jewish. And they're like, oh, what do you mean? What do you mean? It's like, do you people not listen to what these guys are actually saying? Absolutely. So what you see in the most recent video where he interviewed Clayton Morris, is it Morris or Norris? Clayton Morris interviewed Thomas Massey. Massey made a very subtle claim in that thing. And if you're not listening closely, you will miss it. Now, Massey has come out and he touts the fact that I'm the only person in Congress who's not controlled by AIPAC. Because people only support Israel if they're getting money for their campaigns. Because we all know Israel's evil. That's the subtext of what he's saying. And it really amounts to almost, I would call it a soft blood libel. The Jews control everything, and nobody would sit down and rationally support Israel from a biblical or geopolitical perspective. So I'm the purest guy of all. I'm exposing AIPAC and all the money involved, and and all the stuff that they do. Like, there's nobody else doing lobbying and funding people like, say, Qatar or Saudi Arabia or anything in Washington, D.C. The whole place is awash with money and influence and that type of thing. But sometimes people just make a rational decision. I think Israel's in the right here. But so when this war unfolded in Israel, they had the problem along the border. And Israel's looking at this from a rational perspective and saying, we kind of managed the Assad thing. And they've made a lot of bombing runs and that type of things into Syria to hit manufacturing facilities and elsewhere. But they know that Russia established 9 outposts on the Golan Heights over the last year, fortified them, and Russia's been involved. But the Golan Heights is full of Hezbollah forces. And when we were there in 2017, I ended up accidentally very close to the border fence in the Golan Heights. My GPS was kind of messed up. And this is a common thing up there, is there's jamming things that go on. So I went down a road, and all of a sudden I go through this gate and I see this rusty sign with a disc at the top that says UN. And so I'm thinking, I'm sure that the Israeli soldiers up at the lookout are looking down and saying, look at that stupid American guy over there. He doesn't know what he's doing. Let's see if he can figure this out. So I turn around, but you need to understand, at that time in 2017, on the other side of that border fence was a group called ISIS.
Yeah.
So it's a very, you don't want to accidentally wander across the fence or through the fence or anything. And people go back and forth all the time. But because Israel would go over and get people that were injured in ISIS fights and bring them back and treat them in Israeli hospitals and that sort of thing. So what Massey said, though, he said, Israel invaded the Golan Heights and they're moving on. And that's not what happened. What happened was Syria fell to Islam. Massey's comment acts like Israel invaded Syria as part of the takeover by the Islamists and jihadis of Syria. That's not what happened. Israel saw what happened. They saw the Islamists come in and take over in this stunningly quick thing. Then they said, okay, now there's some people attacking the UN guys in this border area. We better take it over, stabilize the situation, create a bigger buffer zone to protect our people. And then Israel is engaged in probably the most massive bombing campaign in its history over the past less than week. And they have essentially destroyed, by most estimates, 85 to 95% of all of the Syrian army and Syrian military and Syrian Air Force capabilities.
Absolutely, and John, put it in the context of the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the amount of armaments that were left there and left in a field which can end up all over the world, being copied by China or end up in the Ukraine, which some of them have. Absolutely right. So Israel are bombing them because, quite rightly, they want to take out those armaments, so those armaments are not turned against them in the hands of Al Qaeda, ISIS, and all the other nutbags that have just entered into Syria. Is that a fair point?
Absolutely correct. And so I'm going to make a recommendation for you that of a show that I think everybody should go watch, because I think it will add further context to this, and we don't really have time to get into it. Somebody sent it to me this morning. And of course, everybody wants to criticize the guy. The guy's name is Sean Ryan. He's a former military special forces guy. Spent time in it. I don't know. And people say, well, he had problems with a drug addict and that. Okay, everybody makes mistakes, and we believe in redemption and grace. But I interviewed a young lady named, I'll say young because she looks young to me, Sarah Adams. And she's a military CIA type person. And she says, and I think this ties directly to your Afghanistan content. So I'm still researching this. So this is kind of fresh in my mind. So I'm sort of thinking out loud. So, John, I have not reached absolute conclusions on this, but you're mentioning the equipment left behind in Afghanistan that has now been reconstituted and fallen into the hands of the Taliban and Al Qaeda, that's reconstituting itself in Afghanistan, in some respects with the help of Russia. Okay. How did all of this stuff get to these rebel groups? And who's all behind these rebel groups in Syria? Now, the one guy that's leading it, a guy named Jolani, who comes from the Golan Heights originally, he has been in Al Qaeda, he has been in ISIS, he's been in Al Nusra, and now he's heading up these rebel groups under the banner of HTS. I believe that what Sarah's theory is in this show on Sean Ryan, I'll send you the link so you can put it in the show notes.
Thanks, Tom.
Is that they're all kind of tied into Al Qaeda.
Yep.
Her further theory is, and I think this is what's most concerning, I know this is nothing you planned on talking about, that Al Qaeda, through our open border and through open borders across Europe and the UK, have infiltrated and brought operatives in, and they are planning. And by the way, I believe her theory also is that Al Qaeda was very much involved in the planning and execution of the October 7 attacks in Gaza, from Gaza into Israel. And they are planning attacks of that type in the United States. And I don't know if this drone stuff is related to this or not, or if it's a distraction to get them in place. But it's clear from what happened in Syria that everybody thought the thing had calmed down. There have been little battles back and forth over time. But things had pretty much become static in Syria with the different groups. You had the Kurdish, I don't know what they're called, they all pick names that make them sound like they're running Syria, so it's kind of difficult. So the Kurdish areas in northeast Syria, the area of a lot of agriculture and oil, with the support of there's probably 900 or 1,000 U.S. troops up in that area in the northeast of Syria to kind of help manage things. Now, some people say, oh, Israel, we're up there training the ISIS terrorists. Now, I don't know that there's any proof of that. If you've got it, bring the receipts and not your theory. But so you have the Kurdish up in the northeast. You have the Turkish zones of influence along the Syrian border, which Turkey wants to expand down. I've got plenty of maps from Erdogan's people and supporters that want to reconstitute the Islamic Caliphate. And it's pretty clear that Turkey was giving a lot of support to these rebel groups.
Yep.
And it's very clear that with the speed of it, these are not some ragtag group that just decided like, hey, let's go invade Damascus or in Aleppo. They planned this for years. And everybody says, well, why isn't Al-Qaeda doing this more often? And the answer is you have to train people. You have to plan. And so Sarah Rogers, in an interview with Sean Ryan, she points to the attacks done by Al-Qaeda in Mumbai, India. Remember how they attacked Jewish synagogues and Taj Mahal and everything? And she tells about how they had very sophisticated plans. And as the police responded in Mumbai, in the military, they were able to shift the way they were doing the attack to extend it over time to get more dead. That's what they want. They want mass casualty event. It sounds very much like what happened in Gaza. So now let's translate this to Syria,
Yep.
and Lebanon, and what's been going on. So Israel has done a massively good job in Israel or in Lebanon. They've taken out a lot of Hezbollah. They really decimated Hamas. Still not gone. Hezbollah is still not gone. But they killed thousands, and it was sort of this. It's hard for me to describe how significant everything is. A number of commentators that I've listened to on the fall of the Syrian government, which the Assad family has ruled this thing with an iron fist for 54 years, is a tectonic shift. It's an earthquake. It's almost a volcano exploding. And a lot of people have said in the Middle East, the fall of Syria is the equivalent of the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989, or 88 or 89, whatever that was, which Putin today is still ticked off about, by the way. So, so as Israel did the Beeper attacks, then they attacked into southern Lebanon. They started taking out things. People started leaving. Southern Syria emptied out. And then a lot of people in Israel, and my friend Danny Seaman was on the IDSF briefing yesterday, Israeli Defense and Security Force.
Because, John, sorry to interrupt, what people have got to understand, and tell me if I've got this right, the Hezbollah, of course, have been assisting to prop up the Assad regime, as they are a proxy of Iran, and of course Iran have been investing in Syria as well.
At some point, yeah, I would say that upwards of 50,000 Hezbollah fighters provided assistance to the Assad regime and keeping the Assad regime. And as a result of that, they were, I believe they were given influence in areas along the northern border of Israel. Because if you look at a map of Hezbollah units, I've interviewed them at the Alma Research, in the north. They've created maps that show all the different, and in fact, I think the Atlantic Council or somebody has a big map that you can find that has where all the Hezbollah related militias are in Syria and Lebanon. Israel's done unbelievably well in Syria. I'm sorry, in Lebanon. They're only taking a little tiny sliver of Syria, so I don't want people to misinterpret what I just said there. Yeah. They've gone into Lebanon. The fear. I was doing interviews with people from Israel, and they're concerned about hundreds of dead Israelis a day from Hezbollah rocket attacks. Overwhelming, and you can see all the stories. They're afraid they're going to do this. They're going to overwhelm the hospital systems in Haifa and Tel Aviv. And the goal was, Hamas had a goal, we'll come from the south, Hezbollah will come from the north, and their goal was to kill or take captive 1 million Israelis. And then 150,000 rockets, but the rockets were bad, but they were never thousands a day like people thought. Israel interdicted and controlled that. And it's also possible that Iran had created this environment where people believed that they were stronger than they were.
Absolutely.
So Israel deals with Lebanon. Iran attacks Israel. Israel takes out Hania in Tehran, and Iranian Revolutionary Guards secure house. The number 2 guy, or the head of Hamas. And then Iran responds, and then Israel responds. Then I think Iran responds with like 180 ballistic missiles. And then Israel makes this stunning attack. So in the attack, they go up. So Saudi Arabia and Jordan say, don't use our airspace. So Israel says, that's fine. We'll do it a different way. They go into Syria. They take out the air defense systems in Syria. They go into Iraq. They take out, because that's largely under control of Shia militias sponsored by Iran. They take out the air defenses there, and then they waltz into Iran. They take out air defense things, and then they start attacking all these significant military facilities. And they completely, I think the description somebody said was, the Ayatollah has no clothes.
Yeah.
He's totally naked in terms of protecting himself. And Israel is sending a message, you can't stop us. And you have to wonder how they're either extremely committed or very dense or both in Iran. Remember, I don't know how many years ago it was. Remember, they had this big news conference, and Netanyahu got on stage and said, here are all the nuclear documents that we stole from, not the copies, the actual documents. They got them from a warehouse in Tehran, got them out of Iran and all the way to Israel, notebooks and CDs and DVDs and data and all this stuff.
Yep. I remember that presentation. And it's like, how is that even, a lot of people, I think, in our U.S. military, and I think probably in your military too, would sit there and say, well, that's impossible. Nobody would ever try that. That's crazy. That's insane. And maybe that's why it works, because it's so unexpected. So Israel has sent a message to Iran, we'll do whatever we want whenever we do. Then Israel entered into a ceasefire. And I'll have to go back and look at what Danny Seaman said on the IDSF briefing yesterday. It's about 5 minutes in. It's very important, though. And he said, I'm kind of investigating this. He's a friend of mine, former spokesperson for the government and IDF and all this stuff, lives in there. And he said, we entered into the ceasefire and everybody's ticked off. Why are we doing this ceasefire now? The thinking among some in Israel is that Israel had an inkling that the rebels were getting ready to move, in part because they had completely destroyed or significantly weakened the Iranian proxies throughout Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, and Iran itself with its lack of air defenses.
And I think what happened was when the rebels, whoever is supporting them, clearly Turkey is. There's no doubt about that. These rebels were ready to move, and they moved. But I'm not so sure they didn't have some of this equipment from Afghanistan to help them out. Because Al Qaeda, everybody, these alliances in the Middle East shift all the time. And I remember seeing an interview with a guy he was talking on his YouTube channel about being in Syria. And so you're traveling around Syria and you carry with you all the different patches of the militias. And you approach a checkpoint and you hope you pulled the right patch out to put on your uniform, or that it's at least one that they don't hate, that they'll kill you over. So it's very tribal. We put these countries together, we meaning the West, under the Sykes-Picot Agreement back in 1916. And we just kind of drew some lines on a map and said, okay, the French you take north of the line, the British you take south of the line. And it had no consideration of all the tribal animosities and conflicts that were involved. And so so when people say, I say Syria's not a real country, it's really not. It's not an organically real country. It's been an area in conflict and tribal things for years. And now we're sort of seeing that come to the fore. So back to Massey, though, what I really objected to was his very subtle thing that Israel invaded Syria to help out the rebels. That's not the way the timeline went. And it's a complete fabrication. And you are seeing this enormous anti-Israel, anti-Jewish spouting of blood libels, sometimes subtle, like redacted with Congressman Massey. Well, like I said, I probably like on a lot of things. But, you're seeing Tucker did a big interview. I haven't even had time to look at it yet. I've got some Ukrainian friends who are going to give me their opinions on it. Interviewing Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, who is an abject, complete liar on almost everything that comes out of his mouth. But and Tucker goes and doesn't challenge him, just like he did with Putin. Putin gives this completely distorted history of Russia and Ukraine. And I said this to some of my Ukrainian evangelical friends, and they look at this and they're like, Tucker got completely duped by Putin. That's a complete fabrication of the history of this region and how we view it. And so there's a lot of propaganda that's going on all different sides. So it's a little bit hard to sort through. And I get that. But now you have, like today, Candace Owens yesterday, or 2 days ago, and it's got millions of views. I don't even know how many views it's gotten so far. She puts out a thing and she calls it a personal
announcement.
Yeah. And so a lot of people, they remember her. She did some videos for Dennis Prager and stuff like that. It's got 2.4 million views in a day.
Well, Dennis, under much sadness, really called her out and really pushed back, quite rightly.
He did.
In regard to her.
But what her video is, she has been over the last year recycling anti-Jewish blood libels.
Yeah.
Even from medieval times. So she's got this. I'm telling you what, she is a complete grifter. Anybody who takes her seriously is foolish. I don't like to use that term. But so now what she's doing is she's bringing up the USS Liberty that was sunk by Israel in 1967. And so you need to go, if you want to read about this, go to camera.org, Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting. Great people there, and some of the people that are or used to be with them. Very, very committed to accuracy, and they have many articles debunking this nonsense about the USS Liberty. But it comes up every now and then. 10 years ago, Al Jazeera put up a documentary about the USS Liberty. A few years ago, Rick Wiles at True News, who has become
anti-Semitic
on steroids.
Yeah, he has.
And I repent of ever having been on his program, which I was before he changed. He put up a thing about the USS Liberty, and now she's doing it. And understand, this is a propaganda liar grifter that's bringing this stuff out.
Well, let's just clarify with in the last few minutes we got, but Liberty was being used was passing on Israeli information in regard to fighting the war to the Egyptians. That's what they were doing. And then let's just bear something in mind as well, John, and tell me what your thoughts on this, in the fact that, of course, there has been all this, the UN stationed here, there, and everywhere, and then it seems that they're actually assisting the forces against Israel. Let's remember the tunnels that have been built, that has meant that goods have been able to flow under the Egyptian border into Gaza, etc. All those tunnels have been found. Those tunnels are big enough to get military trucks through, etc., even though there's supposed to be a peace agreement on that border with Egypt and Israel and all the rest. So nothing changes, does it, in regard to behavior, sir?
No, there's just, and like I said, Candace is just another one of many out there that are recycling these old, easily debunked, long time debunked blood libels. And listen, it works, right? How many people do you think will view this video, which I think is rational and analytical?
Yeah.
And she puts up this absolute nonsense and gets 2.4 million views and has this smug attitude about, look how smart and good I am. She used to support Black Lives Matter, folks. So she's a grifter. She's very good at sticking her finger up and saying, this is the way to go to make money. And that's the best thing I could say about her. But I think she's wrong on many, many levels. I mean, she came out and said that Muslims or Arabs could only live in one small section of the old city of Jerusalem.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Complete nonsense. It's like you haven't even, if you've been there and that's a conclusion you came away with, you're even worse than I thought. So we're going to see this. So anyway, in Syria, which I think we were ostensibly going to talk about, it's a very fluid situation. They're finding that the Assad regime was just brutal. And somebody sent me a video and they said, oh, well, this partisan girl, the Syrian girl on Twitter says this. She is a complete Assad. Well, there's a word that I would use, I probably shouldn't use on a program like this. She's a complete propagandist, hates Jews, and she's so brave she lives in Australia and does all these stuff on Twitter about protecting Assad and promoting Assad and all this. They're finding these prisons in Damascus. They've had control of them for a week, and they're still finding lower levels of dungeons every day with people in them. And they're saying 99% of the people who went into Assad's prisons are dead. I mean, it's gruesome and it's brutal. But remember, Assad's father, when he had some people protesting against him, he went in and killed like 30,000 people in Hama. And so people remember things a long time in the Middle East. So this thing is not going away. And as I said, this is a tectonic earthquake type event geopolitically. And you can tell that by the vast number of videos that have been put up by everybody under the sun about it, because it is really, really that big.
It's really interesting, isn't it, to both of us, where when you've said a very interesting thing about Massey, you know, you and I, well, I could as well. 98% of stuff we'll agree with, and then suddenly all this anti-Semitism, blatant stuff is slipped out there, and there are, of course, others. But what this has done has drawn out people. I mean, you know, just quickly again, just reminding ourselves of UK politics over here, where they're quite rightly saying Assad appalling. We can't even get our head around that, our head around it in regard to the treatment of people, as someone who is Alawite and then they've been there for 54 years, and they're all going, oh, isn't this great, but not having any understanding of HTS, who they are. We in the UK are now in a position where there are many people from Syria that came over here. Now that Assad is gone, maybe they will be returning, but I could see them coming back fairly shortly, because it's not going to be very, very nice unless they all want to live under Sharia law and all the rest. And like with you, you raise a very, very important question on your border. Who is in your country? Who's come over your border on the southern border in Texas? It's exactly the same with us now. There's at least 4,000 could even cope with that. But we have got people that we are watching all the time, John, that do not like our country, that wish to do some appalling things to our country, and we can't even have a calm discussion about that. But suddenly the government are going, oh yes, it's great, the Assad regime is gone. Now look at the fact that you've got these grouping who are Al Qaeda, ISIS, all rolled into one, etc., etc. And then, as you said, the accusation against Israel have gone in and invaded Syria or been in bloody blah. No, they have taken a defensive line in regard to Mount Hermon and there in regard to the Golan and the importance of that. And how would you feel if you were them, surrounded by all of these enemies? And just finally, like, we look back at what Sinwar wanted to do in regard to Hamas and destroying Israel. Well, I don't think he meant to completely redraw the Middle Eastern map in the way that we are seeing unfold. Did he? Because of the way Hezbollah has been reacting, the way that what's been happening against Hamas as well, and Fleur of the Quad, the brilliant program that comes out of with the four ladies out of JNS News, and Fleur was just saying, I think, even in the last 24 hours, and you've described it, that Iran, she said, I've always felt it was like a paper tiger. Now, it's because of the nuclear weapons. John, in the last sort of minute, what do you think Israel should do next? And maybe I've just given you a clue. How will they then maybe move on? Will they move on Iran, my friend? What are your thoughts?
Well, you have the U.S. administration working against them, slow walking weapons supplies, which we have agreements to supply them with, because there's a lot of, Tony Blinken, Hochstein, and those guys, they need to be investigated. And if Kash Patel, when he gets in charge of the FBI, wants to give me a call, I have some ideas where I think this will lead in terms of the money flow. But understand, China, we have these drones. China's selling drones like crazy to Iran. Iran has said they're going to take out Trump. Iran has said they put up videos on the Ayatollah's own page about assassination attempts on Trump at his golf course and that type of thing. They hold him responsible for the killing of Soleimani, who is a George Washington type figure in Iran.
Yes.
This is not over. This is not going away. I personally am inclined to think that the drone thing is tied to this as a distraction, intel or stuff for big attacks in the United States. And I do not think that you're going to see stuff, Mark. You're going to see when was the attack on the subways in London? Was that July 2022 or 2002? You know,
yeah, I know the incidents you are remembering.
You're going to see Charlie Hebdo type attacks. You're going to see
yeah.
stuff. I'm telling you what, I wouldn't go to the inauguration if I was thinking about it rationally, because I think something's going to happen. And so, what does Israel need to do? I don't know if they do it now or they wait till Trump and hope that Trump actually gets in office on January 20th. So that's less than 40 days away now. They need to go take out the Iranian nuclear thing to the extent that they can.
I hear.
If they do it when Trump comes in, they're going to get access to the giant bunker busters. I mean, these, what do they call them? Moabs, mother of all bombs.
Yep.
They're going to get access to that. I think they also, I mean, the Biden administration just released like $10 billion of sanctioned money to Iran.
John,
understand. The damage in Syria is billions of dollars that Israel's caused. Iran has lost all that money. Russia's lost all that money. Everybody's ticked off, and there's a lot more coming. And people, you need to be very situationally aware when you're out and about, because these guys are all over the place.
Absolutely. And John, just thank you. Sorry to cut you off as we're coming against the hour. But the key thing is that we must be in prayer about all of this. I think that's one of the biggest messages we can end with. John, thank you so much for your time. I have a funny feeling we are going to be doing this again very, very, very soon. I don't say that just for hyperbole or as a way of pushing ourselves forward on another podcast. It's the fact that we're trying to keep people up to date, but more importantly, encourage people to pray about what's going on, because this is a very, very nervous time. John, I'll play us out. Thank you very much indeed, my friend. Cheers.
Thanks.